Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Eastgate podcast, where we have in-depth conversations about topics of the Bible that we may not cover on Sunday morning. My name is Nate, and today I'm joined by Rob Woodrum, Janelle Green, Matt Green, and Blake Roseman. We're going to be starting this podcast off with a little explanation of why we're even doing a podcast in the first place, and then we'll get into a little bit of the history of Eastgate. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Nate.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you for
What
being
are we doing here?
Right now, we're introducing ourselves.
Ah, perfect. I can do that. Hey, my name's Rob. I am a pastor here.
I'm Janelle, and I'm also a pastor here, and I'm Rob's daughter. So sometimes I'll refer to Rob as Dad.
I'm Matt. I'm the worship leader.
I'm Blake, and I am the community pastor here at Eastgate.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So my first question is, less of a question and more of we can discuss it. Why are we even doing a podcast in the first place?
That's what I keep asking. I've been the moment you dragged me in here.
I keep asking, what is a podcast?
So does anybody want to answer for real? Or
I know the answer, but it's only because I know everything.
Oh, great. What is
I don't
it?
want Blake
There
to
it
answer.
is.
Oh,
I think that, something I feel like that the reason this came up is that we were realizing that if you have not been at Eastgate your whole life, or if you don't know us very well, or if you're still getting to know sort of the personality of Eastgate, it might be hard to gather that just from a Sunday morning meeting when Matt's just singing a bridge over and over, or Rob's blubbering on stage. So this helps you get an idea of what our personalities are actually like.
I also think too that we were excited about a podcast because it gives us an opportunity to dive deeper into subjects that we can't necessarily do on a Sunday morning.
So you're saying it's not about people getting to know me better?
It's both. It can be everything. But
Ancillary.
I do think, with the topic that we're going to be getting into for this series, we can really deep dive and really hopefully spend some time understanding the culture and the context.
Yes.
and really learn things maybe in a new way. And bring some topics and things to light that wouldn't typically be a Sunday morning teaching.
Yeah, and that's important because we've got a limited time frame on a Sunday morning. I want to spend that time. That's the one day a week where I've got people's attention and we've got people's attention, and we want to focus on
because I know I'm not
Jesus.
listening to you during the other days.
No, nobody does.
Barely listening on Sunday, but
I can barely get an automatic door to open and for me. I just had ignored.
Well, I just enjoyed the idea of podcasts as something. I mean, I listen to them pretty frequently.
I saw a cartoon that showed video killed the radio star, and then it showed a podcast like resurrecting the radio star.
that's great.
All right, very good. So what are the goals of this podcast?
World domination.
To become a viral sensation, I think.
Yeah,
right?
to get super rich and quit our jobs.
There we go. These are all valid.
I'm not even going to weigh in on this nonsense.
I do feel bad for Rob. Sometimes got to deal with us. Go
I
ahead.
do. I do think that the goals are kind of like what we said
Yeah.
earlier, which is just being able to have a chance
To expand the conversation, to include more topics that we can't normally get to on a Sunday morning, and also to invite people to share this time with us so they get to know us a little bit better, and we can fuse into a deeper community.
All right, cool.
Timer going on anything.
So what do you hope to get out of this podcast?
I'll speak for myself. I grew up in the church and have learned, as a kid, I learned all the sort of basic Old Testament, Bible stories, David and Goliath and Daniel in the Lion's Den and Noah's Ark. And then as I got older, you dive into the Gospels a little more, and Jesus sort of becomes the focus. And I think I've always struggled, until recently, to see the full story of the Bible. Like, what's the Old Testament leading into Jesus? Because in some ways, if you just pick like a section out of the Old Testament and then something Jesus said, it feels like you're reading two different books.
Yeah.
And specifically reading about two different gods. And so I know one thing we talked about in this podcast is, or in wanting to create this podcast, is sort of talking about the Old Testament more. Because I mean, it's kind of funny because we are actually doing an Old Testament book right now on Sunday mornings, but we don't typically do Old Testament on Sunday mornings. So the idea of kind of diving deeper into the Old Testament and seeing how it applies to our relationship with Christ and sort of the covenant, the new covenant, that's of interest to me. So that's what I hope to get out of it on a personal basis.
Yeah, and I think that's I mean, you bring up a valid point that does feel like a disparity, and that goes all the way back to the 2nd century A.D. I think it was Marcion that had convinced himself that there were two different gods that the Bible was describing. Obviously, he was deemed a heretic, but it can be a struggle, especially you point people to Greg Boyd's seminal work on that, the dealing with the Old Testament violence and all of that. The what is the name of that book? It's the death of the angry death of the
Salesman.
Not Death of the Salesman. Greg Boyd has a lot of work that he's done on that subject. Crucifixion of the Warrior God is one that he wrote. It's a 2-volume set, but it really deals deeply with how we transition from the violence that we read about in the Old Testament to Jesus' revelation of God. You know, you'd have to make your own conclusions as to whether or not he's on that. But it goes to your point. But it's an important thing for us to grasp the larger story from which the gospel emerges, and it helps us to understand what the gospel is addressing as it touches humanity, and it reveals a lot of God's heart and his values and priorities.
I think something that's really helpful with reading the Old Testament as well, not that this podcast will just be the Old Testament, but that's one of the first things we're going to be looking at, is realizing that, you know, the world that we live in today, so often we hear people be like, it's madness out there, and it is. I'm not denying that. But when you read the Old Testament, you see like it's been madness for a long time.
Yes.
And I think that it helps to realize like this isn't necessarily brand new things that we're dealing with and experiencing, and that you see God's presence and hand at work even in those chaotic times and stories from the Old Testament. And so I think that it helps to maybe help, for me, the fear factor of the unknowns going on, and realizing these things have happened before. It's not scary to God, and he has a plan to set things right.
That's right.
And we get to be a part of that.
That's right.
Well, I was talking to Rob and Nate on Sunday about reading through the Old Testament and recognizing that all the people that are in the stories and the people who wrote the stories, it's been a revelation to me on recognizing that they are regular human beings just like I am. They're writing a story of what God's done in their life the best way that they can, and trying to describe events in the best way that they can. And to look at it like that, we have a tendency to put on pedestals, sainthood, some of these, all the Old Testament people, the prophets, the characters, kings, all of them. And it's been really helpful for me to look at the Old Testament through that viewpoint of these are just regular Joes, and trying to get through life, trying to understand who this God is, and we're still doing the same thing. I will say that we have an added revelation having Jesus, but I mean, we're still trying to figure out what this mystery is.
That's it. It's a journey. It's not a place where we've landed. It's a journey that we're on in the continual unfolding of the discovery of God and his purposes and his plans. Obviously, we have some information to go on. I'm not saying it's a complete blind journey, but yeah, it's still an ongoing thing.
I do think maybe another thing, to go back to the question, like, what do we hope to get out of this? Like, I was thinking about what Rob was saying earlier about, we only get like an hour and a half with people on a Sunday morning. Yeah. I mean, we're, a mid-sized church that meets once a week, unless we have small groups or something.
Makes it sound like a car.
Everybody, that's true, mid-sized church. That's right. 4 doors. We're a 4-door sedan church. But so we get, you get an hour and a half with everybody in one room, and then once they leave, they're back to being, we are back to being bombarded with the world.
Right.
Social media, news, work, school, family, whatever. And so when they show up on a Sunday and we, have run into them or we've seen them on social media and we're like, man, none of us are keeping up with what we've been learning on Sundays. What's going on? Like, why aren't we, any of us, like, really living the things that we preach? And I'm including us in that. And I think something like this is hopeful that it'll be like, all right, well, here's one more voice that hopefully is, a voice that's going to speak life instead of death and order instead of chaos, and,
Right on.
All right. So as to not make this a podcast about podcast, I kind of wanted to get into the history and the beginnings of Eastgate as a way to show our personality, which I think is one of our goals with this. So when did Eastgate start, and what was the cause of it?
So Blake, when you started Eastgate, what was it like? What made you start Eastgate?
Started Eastgate last month, and the goal was to make as much money as possible. We're failing miserably.
We're bankrupt now. But hey, we had fun.
So,
Dad,
this
I think
podcast
this is
the last breath.
I think this question's for you, Dad, because you're the one that started it, right?
But you were there.
I suppose that what Matt, I'm the newer one here, I suppose.
I'm the newest. I'm the newest one here, technically.
Nate is the newest.
All right, so do you want to answer about Eastgate starting?
Yeah, well, I mean, Eastgate, here's the thing. So this question gets asked of me a lot, and my standard answer is it's a church by accident. We never set out to start or plant a church. A lot of Eastgate is just born out of my own damaged psyche from what I went through. I mean,
that's beautiful. So share more about that.
That should be on our website.
My story, along with so many others' story, was I experienced so much trauma from my church experiences within, what is considered to be the basic formula that comprises a church in 21st century America, or especially within the realm of evangelicalism. And so when I checked out of that, I really struggled because I absolutely believe that Jesus instituted the church. I just didn't understand how in the world I was supposed to interface with this.
Can you give us a timeline on that? Like, when are we talking at this point?
Late 80s, early 90s. And I was bereft of any sense of hope that I was ever going to be able to plug back into church. The damage that had been done, and this is not an indictment on all the other churches that I visited. It's just what was going on with me because of what I had experienced. I couldn't help but kind of freight in my own worries and fears over the whole thing. So I was back at the old public library, Bay County Library in downtown, the old one, sitting there outside of it. It used to be located right on the dock. And so I was sitting on the dock of the bay.
Wow.
Watching the tide roll away?
Yes.
This was a fun story.
No, but so it just kind of dropped into my heart. Maybe you can do something differently. Maybe we could approach this with all the things that I know I don't want involved in this, and see if it can come out differently. And so that's it. We started a home group in my house, 1,000 square foot house. It kept growing. All we did was just basically what we do here. We sang a few songs and then just got into scripture and started working our way through it. But that's all. It just got to the point where we had 40 people in a 1,000 square foot house, and it was.
And I think we were going to a church at the time that the pastor was leaving.
Yes, that's correct.
And so then we kind of inherited their building.
Todd Smith, he was had planted. He intentionally planted a church, but then he got a job opportunity to go back down south, and he just asked if we wanted the stuff that he had accumulated.
Was this in the Promenade Mall?
He was meeting in the Promenade Mall, and so we prayed. I got the group together, and we prayed and asked the Lord, should we do this? Is this the thing to do? And we all seemed to get the sense that, yeah, we should do this. So then we had to start the arduous task of becoming a 501c3, which Robbie did.
And I think, too, it wasn't, I know that in wanting to do something different, there was some trial and error and finding what were the things you were going to hold on to and what were the things you were going to let go, because I know you had tried to do Saturday night church.
Yes, that's right.
And that failed miserably.
It failed miserably because I spent most of my time trying to explain that we're not Jehovah's Witnesses. We're just trying to think outside the box.
We went a whole day off on Sunday.
Yeah,
And,
which I still think is a great idea, but it just was pushing too hard against cultural expectations that you're just never going to.
And so I think that there is a lot of learning there, too, in terms of like picking your battles and thinking,
Yep.
we want to meet people where they're at culturally. We want to make this a space that people can enter into. And
But wouldn't you say that's an ongoing thing? Like, I feel like we're constantly shifting and changing, and, we have to. I feel like that's the important part of being a living, breathing community, is that it's going to change. It's going to unfold.
Yeah, our staff meetings are mostly us, like, looking at things we've done in the past and saying, do we want to do this again?
Mm-hmm.
Is this the right? Should we do it again? Sometimes we should, and sometimes the tradition is part of the ritual and part of the
Right.
But we are always, even thinking. I feel like even down to just the bare bones stuff.
Right.
Like, should we be playing 3 songs? Should
Blake work here?
Well, that's every week, right?
Well,
I have
Poor
the same
Blake.
question.
No,
actually, I don't think we ever ask that question. We say Blake shouldn't work here, and then he shows up.
And he's like, totally. Isn't it weird?
Blake is actually being very polite and waiting his turn, so we should give him a chance
Well,
to
it's
speak.
just because you said that I can't talk whenever other microphones are being used. So, because I've had so much to say.
We know.
No, please share, Blake.
About what were we talking about?
And that sums up our staff meeting. There it is.
No, I did want to ask. You said that this happened in the late 80s, early 90s, but Eastgate got started in 95.
Yeah, it's not late 80s. Well, I left church in the late 80s. Early 90s
Okay,
is when. So 93 is when the home group started.
Okay.
95 is when Eastgate started
There's still
proper.
a 3 to 4 year gap there, and so
We never speak of that gap. No, that's the.
there's a missing part of your resume.
There's
here.
a whole period of time where I was searching for a church. I was I believed in church. I believed in the concept. I absolutely believed that Jesus intended for us to be a church, to be a part of that. I could not find my way in. I couldn't do it.
I'll
Were
say,
you tearing through scripture at that time?
I was looking at, but part of me. So you've heard this other story, and I don't
Were you
wanna-
even reading the Bible at the
Yeah.
time? Did you pray at
Listen,
all?
I was, but my prayer was very simple because I came from a very legalistic structure that made it very clear that if you're not toeing the line, God has no patience for you, and you'll probably be out. And so I spent most of my time praying, and you've heard this story, I'm sure, before. God, don't give up on me. And so that story fits within that timeline.
you can tell that story again.
Yeah,
It's a
we've
good
heard it,
story.
but there's people
okay.
listening who haven't probably.
Well, that was it. I mean, because I came from a structure that very clearly delineated what the rules of behavior and how it is that a Christian comports himself through life, and it was very strict. When I left that, I was suddenly in a free fall. I didn't know, were those rules right? And is God mad at me? I think he is. Why would he not be? Like
that's what you had been taught.
Right. Yeah, that's what I had been taught. And so
But yeah, I remember it too, because that was a time that Mom would take us to church because
That's
she
right.
wanted us to be there. But I think that you were, the church kind of crumpled you up and left you as kind of a shell of a person, and
100%
it took some time.
Yeah, and I got her point that you kids needed to be in church, and I felt so bad because I couldn't do it. I was exhausted, and I just had nothing in me that could do that.
So you went into the Bible and found everything that a church is supposed to be in the Bible, and you listed it out, and that's what we.
That's exactly right. Honestly,
What's
what
in the-
happened
what's
was
in the Bible?
finish the
so
story.
in the midst of this terrible malaise that I was in, we did pop into a church, happened to be a Vineyard church, and the worship was off the chain. I mean, it was so good. Like everything about it was beautiful.
Those 90s vineyard worship bands were something
Like at
else.
the peak, right? But I was dead. I mean, I was just dry and just couldn't connect, and I got mad. I was literally looking around at everybody thinking, how do they do this? Like, this guy looks like a loser. How come he can keep the rules and be okay with this and join in it? It was bad. And so in the midst of that, I felt bad for complaining, felt bad for getting upset. And I just started into my rote. God, don't give up on me. Please don't give up on me. And I had an experience. Nobody has to believe it. It was my experience. Certainly don't base anything else on that. But
Janelle, write this down.
my experience was that I felt as though I had a Christophany moment. I felt as though Jesus had appeared in front of me. And the impression I had was of hands outward, like ready for an embrace. And all I heard was, why would I give up on you? And my thinking was, well, I got a ton of reasons. Hold on. I'll pull those out and I'll explain to you. And it came again. Why would I give up on you? I paid a great price for you and I love you. And that was it. But that was enough. That shattered my, and there's more to it in that, what I was experiencing in that moment. And there's no way to articulate or explain. But all I can say is the idea that I brushed against an infinite love. It was amazing. And it shook me to the core and revolutionized everything about my understanding of God. I went away from that realizing I've had it backwards my whole Christian experience. I kept thinking about what I have to do for God, not realizing it's about what he's done for me in order to bring me back to the person I was meant to be. So
That's such a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing it again. I know we've asked you to share it a lot, but it's I've heard it so many times, and I love hearing it every time. And you can, I don't know, it's such a, I'm just so thankful that the experience of the harm that was done there was not that, how God was able to redeem that.
Right on.
That instead of you staying a shell of a person and maybe becoming bitter and anything, all the possibilities, negative possibilities from that, but that God was able to redeem that and use that for you to share that grace and love with other people.
Well, I mean, that's it. He loved me back to life. That's the whole bottom line to that. And so, but what's crazy though, is that that's not what started Eastgate. Eastgate was 2.5 years after that, even a little more so. That I kept looking around trying to find a church that was going to embody this grace that I had experienced there, this love, and that's not on these churches, but it's just where I was at. That's a superfluous preposition there. That's just where I was, and I wanted to experience that more, and I wasn't able to find that and experience it. So that's when that's when later on we'd moved down to Florida, and it just dropped in my heart. Maybe you can do something different. And that's how Eastgate started.
I think that story also does speak to another reason why we're doing this podcast, is because something we realized is, I think, there's a relatability to that story, even if it's obviously a very specific story. I mean, there's commonality and specificity so often. And I was thinking about how I think so many of our stories are similar, even though we grew up in very different church environments, but all of us had those moments where we're like, what are we doing? Like, why? Yeah. What is the purpose of this? There's certain parts of this thing that make no sense, even in good communities. And I was in a pretty good community, and I still had those moments of like, this is nonsense, and feeling like it was inauthentic, and realizing I'm so grateful to be part of a community where like the sort of exploration and the doubt are like sort of built into the core of what we're doing here. And what I mean by doubt is not like, who knows if it's real, but sort of I'm going to keep exploring. Like you said, it's the journey. It's not like, hey, Eastgate is not a place where we're like, hey, we found the answer. You need to show up and we're going to tell you what it is. Other than Jesus. but other than that, it's, everything else is ancillary.
That's the image that stuck with me, is that I used to have this perception that the Christian faith and this role as a pastor or whatever is to guard something that has already been established. So I'm up on the wall with a gun and I'm going to shoot anything that comes towards it looks like a threat. To realize that to change that, it's not guarding something that has already been established. It's joining in on this journey of discovery, sometimes coming across pathways that others have discovered before, but just the joy of finding this fresh and new thing.
Well, and it's kind of you talk about the Bible Project talks about this too, of like Adam and Eve being gardeners.
Right.
And I think it goes back to that visual. Like, we're not guarding a wall, we're planting something.
That's
we're
right.
growing something.
That's
And we get to be a part of this and see the fruit of what's being planted. And it's such a much more like life-giving
That's right.
picture than just like a cold, stale
That's
wall.
cool. We're not guardians, we're gardeners.
Yeah.
Guardians
Oh.
versus gardeners. I like that.
Neat.
t-shirt.
There's your title of the podcast.
I was thinking a little bit ago whenever we were talking about, how some of the traditions that we do keep, you can't do Saturday night because there's just
A cultural emphasis,
foundation.
yeah.
And there's a lot to be said about tradition as well. But I had this kind of image of a garden in my mind. When you have at your house, you're going to have a lot of the basic vegetables that you would have, tomatoes, cucumbers, and squash and lettuce. They're going to pretty much stay in the same spots, but it's always a new plant. It's not the same tomato plant as last year.
Yeah.
There's always a new plant going, and also you're going to try different things. Like I'm going to try potatoes over here this year, or I'm going to try zucchini. Oh, that didn't work out. I'm never growing zucchini again.
Just because zucchini is disgusting, right? I mean, we all can agree on
well,
that.
we
right?
can no.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When Sammy was little, my daughter was little, she hated zucchini so much, and she would use it as an adjective. So if she didn't like something, she would say it's too keeny. We're like, do you want this? Like, no, that's too keeny. Anyway, when you say that you hate zucchini, that's what made me think of that.
And she's right.
Well, I was just thinking, and to what I was even trying to say earlier when I was like, another reason why we started this podcast, I think, is that when you're hurt by churches and then you happen to be working at one, you fear becoming that place. And
exactly.
And there's some stuff you can't control, but we work really hard to not become the place that's going to cause, spiritual trauma as much as we can. And in doing that, we probably are a little standoffish, even with like telling people we exist. And like people who show up at Eastgate, usually it's an accident. Like they just happen to Google, oh, I guess there's a church in a random, strip mall. I guess I can try that place out. And I think that this was an opportunity for people to not only know that we exist, but to say, if you are somebody who's been hurt by the church, or maybe you've got one foot out the door, like Rob did years ago, or I would imagine all of us at some point have had one foot out the door. I think this is an opportunity to say, here's a place that's doing it this way. If you want to try it, maybe this will work for you. It works for us, and maybe it'll work for you.
Right on.
So something I'm interested about is the timeline of Eastgate.
Mm-hmm.
So like when Eastgate started, so it started in your house.
Correct.
And then when did you move to the Promenade Mall? And then how did we end up here? Kind of like that.
Well, I mean, that's all.
I think the question of how did we end up here is something Dad says every week.
That's such a constant question. How did we end up
So
here?
I know we started in your house, and then
Started in my house, but it wasn't Eastgate at that point, actually. It was just this home group. It was very, very...
Cultish.
very cultish. It was very minimal. So I never foresaw ever getting a 501c3 or doing any of that stuff. But when the pastor left, so this was in late 94, he was going to leave. We agreed to take over in 95. In April of 95, we got our 501c3 status. Robbie worked really hard on that, my wife, and got that all squared away. So in 95, we were in the Promenade Mall, and Eastgate began as an actual functioning, recognized church entity. Then in 2000, we were busting the seams of the little shop there. It was a converted dress shop. It probably wasn't much bigger than my 1,000 square foot house, but we even had there were dressing rooms in the back that we tried to make into kids' classrooms, which is like stuffing a bunch of kids into a closet.
It felt a lot like that, and you couldn't be you guys could hear everything.
You could hear everything you did. So.
Yeah, so that was fun.
So it was nothing better than
it was jail. You put the kids in jail.
Traumatizing about stuffing kids into a closet.
We did not want to hurt people, so we put the kids in the closet.
and didn't let him talk.
and said, "You don't talk."
Yeah.
No, we
It's
had
a
activities.
wonder to me that this thing survived. But
And then I've heard that you guys baptized people in the fountain.
there was a fountain in the Promenade Mall, and my son Daniel, there's pictures of that. We went out there and we tested the water. The pH levels were all good. I mean, it was clean.
So Eastgate's had it all together from the very beginning then. I mean, like all your ducks in a row from the very beginning.
Yes,
Got it.
It
Okay.
is so funny when we talk to other people who have planted churches and they like go through their plans and like, and you got to plan for this and this, and we kind of nod along.
I always
like, yes.
I feel like a 5-year-old kid in those conversations. I'm like, yeah, we learned how to count at one point.
I was thinking that I was like, what's funny is that we've only sort of evolved from that point. Like baptizing in a fountain does not sound like that long ago to me. Like that's something that we at this point would be like,
It's the
"Yeah, we
word
got
out.
a fountain
Oh
outside,
my
let's do
gosh!
it there."
Now
If
just
we
like,
do the
listen,
30th party, we should do trivia and say like, when did we baptize in a fountain? Because people might think last year.
Well, yeah, and we've
true.
changed a lot now. I mean, we just hook the water hose up in the back and spray them down. So, I mean, it's
Yeah, we got a dunk-
much more advanced
we have a
now.
dunk
I still
tank.
remember the
We have a
mall.
dunk tank.
The mall manager called me and said, "I got a report that you guys were baptizing people in the fountain." And I was like, yeah, it was great. And I said, there's nothing to worry about because the water was fine. We tested it and blah, blah. And there was a long pause. She goes, "You cannot baptize people in the fountain."
Well, listen, lady, we didn't want to be one of those weird churches. That's why we started our own.
You get it, right,
You get it.
ma'am? So anyway, we moved.
Yeah. So when we ran out of room, there was a place. So what we have over here where the Kidsgate classes are, that used to be a big actually it was a big network of offices that we put back in. But when we first got there, we ripped all of those offices out, made one big room. And
So how did we end up at this building in the first place?
that's it. We saw that there was this office, Diamond Real Estate used to have their offices over here. They moved out. The rent was really reasonable. And so we prayed about it and we thought, okay, let's go over there. So we ripped
We were too big for Promenade Mall, and we didn't want to do 2 services.
Correct.
And this was a nice thing where it's like, wow, it's 2 minutes down the road. It's a really good price, and we could really make this.
this could be our permanent place
Yeah.
to where we'd never had to.
This would be plenty of room.
Plenty of room. And so we set that up.
Yeah. We renovated in there. We got a bigger closet for the kids.
Bigger closet. Had a window.
Could they talk?
And well, you know what? The first kids' room was right attached to the main room again. Do you remember that? And I remember being in there with babies, and I was helping as a volunteer, and just the whole time, just like shh, 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 because it was again the baby room was right attached to like the main
Yes,
room.
I remember that. But it was actually its own unit. We did rent that unit that was next to us, but it was just a big unit, but it was right smack up against
One of the little rooms was in there, yeah. And then we had more kids areas back there. And then, okay, so this space, which is our like big main room sanctuary, that other people call it sanctuary, we call it the big room, was a karate studio.
That's
and
right.
I remember looking at it. It was, Lee's Taekwondo.
That's
There it
right.
is.
And I remember looking at this space and just being like, that's massive. And I remember somebody saying, wouldn't it be crazy if Eastgate took that one day and be like, that is way too big. We would never fill a space or need a space like that.
Yeah, and that was 2002. This space became available. We prayed about it again. That's what our thing was. I felt this was one that rare for me. I felt strongly like we really need to do this. The numbers didn't quite match up, but we kept praying about it, and everybody felt like, yeah, we should just do it. And sure enough, man, we made the decision to do it. The money was there, the ability to move in here. It was a huge amount of work. You'll see a lot of.
I think you still have PTSD from all
Yeah,
that.
it was a lot. Every bit of tile had to be pulled up, and
That was the year that I started Eastgate. And so you could say that I'm the catalyst for the growth of Eastgate.
yes, that's exactly what I've always thought. And
That's the year we actually count Eastgate as starting.
that's right. There was this little kid coming in here with M&M hair, and I said, "Well, this is it. This is where Eastgate finally gets off the ground."
And then we added more like office space and kids' skate rooms, and so we slowly
Little by little, we
expanded.
keep saying we keep tunneling through the walls in this strip mall.
Yeah.
And,
But it's been a good fit.
it's been wonderful. I mean, honestly, it's just been so reasonably priced, so we haven't had to, stress about that. The landlord we've got right now is just wonderful, and
And we have had times where we've looked for other places for different reasons over the years, even since I've been here. And it's never felt right. We've always ended up coming back and be like, nope, we're good where we are. And I would say at this point, it's just right.
So when we were back in the corner side, I was like, this is great. We'll never have to leave this area. We got plenty of room. And within like 2 weeks, we had to go to 2 services. And then that was horrible. And we had 2 services all the way up until Hurricane Michael. And then we came back to 1 service, and we will do our best to keep it at 1 service.
And we went to 2 services or 1 service because we were meeting outside, right? Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And we were up to 2 services, and then literally Michael hit, and we were like, well, we'll just meet outside for a while. There's no reason to do 2. We'll be in the courtyard.
And then a lot of people moved from the area.
A lot of people moved.
This and stuff.
Yep. And we were like, you know what?
This was
great.
It
is nice to have everybody together.
It really is.
Regardless of if it's cramped or not.
I agree.
And I think that I feel like even like this past Sunday, like it was pretty full in here, and I was just like, well, I'm not going to 2 services. Nope. Some of you people are just going to have to go somewhere else.
I mean, listen, here's the deal. I say no adamantly and stuff. Obviously, we're going to be flexible and do whatever.
Of course. And I can quit. That's totally fine.
But, so far, we've just always been able to keep praying, and God just keeps the church small.
So in 2001 or 2, it was right as we were moving into the bigger building here. I remember talking to you one time, and I was telling you I was praying about the growth of Eastgate, that more people could get this message and that kind of stuff. And Rob says, why don't you pray for the depth of Eastgate instead of the width of Eastgate? And so I still do that.
That's good, actually. Yeah. No,
He was just trying
really
to get
good.
me to shut up, but it was good words.
Well, he was talking to you, so I assume.
No, I do. It is something that when we have people that come to Eastgate from other places, I do think that they assume our goal is to just grow the church and be bigger and bigger.
I think that's a normal assumption. I think that's probably the goal of any organization.
Since the 80s, that has been
not even just churches, but I would say organizations in general, and churches are more and more just.
I frequently get asked how many people attend, and I'm like, I don't know, around
18.
Yeah.
I think it's 18.
That's a running joke. I just feel like we should clarify. Rob is always saying that he thinks 18 people are going to, no matter what the event is. How many people were there? 18. Doesn't matter how many people actually showed up. So I explained the joke, made it funny.
Yes.
Thank you. So I was just saying that when people come to Eastgate from other churches, it's like a regular thing of I think assuming that we care about that, and then sometimes being frustrated that we don't put more emphasis or more like work into like
people have
growing.
moved on when they realize that.
Yeah, we've had some people move on because they get frustrated that we don't put more emphasis
and I get
on
it.
that.
I mean, I that's not a critique of them.
This is a space where we want everybody here who wants to be here, but in terms of like making it our goal to double and triple. I mean, I've been in churches where they're like, God showed me a vision of we're gonna have 50 more people here by the next few months, and it's like that. I just don't agree with that, and I don't want that to be. That can't be my heart behind what's going on here, because it's not, to me, it's not sustainable, and honestly there's no joy in that. It doesn't feel like at all what I see in the Gospels. And Jesus was just teaching, and sometimes there would be a couple people and sometimes there's a lot of people, but he just kept doing what he felt called to do.
Wouldn't you think that even that becomes an alternate motivation from what it was that we're called to be? Isn't the concept of the church to be just a place where we can grow together as a community formed around the truth of who Jesus is? Anything else beyond that becomes not even just an ancillary motive. It becomes an alternative motive.
Well, it goes back to what Blake said, the width versus depth. And I was thinking about...
Rob said that.
I know, but you said it just now. I tried to give you credit. I won't do that again. But I was thinking about, like, we live in the South. Like, we are not... When you grow a church in a place where... Like, grow in numbers a church in a place where maybe they literally have never heard the name of Jesus. That makes sense, because you want people to come in and you're like, hey, I'll tell you about this guy you've never heard of. We live in a place where I would imagine you knock on any door, they know who Jesus is. They probably have a pretty basic story of who he is. What we are offering is a depth. Oh, hopefully, that's our goal, is not to like get more people in here so we can tell them about Jesus, which they already know. It's to say, hey, if you want to be here, we think this is what Jesus was really saying. We think this is what he's calling us to. That kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Okay, so we don't have to get into this if we want to keep the mystique about it, but there's a infamous character who shows up once a year at Eastgate, the British reading guy. What is the origin story of that?
The origin of the British reading guy, honestly, that's one of those things hard to figure out. I'm pretty sure it started in the after we left the Promenade Mall and we were here in what is now the Kids Gate room. I started by reading the Chronicles of Narnia on a Friday night at at what used to be the Corner Coffee House. If we didn't have a band in or whatever, I'd sit up there as the British reading guy and read all the voices and things like that. But every year since Eastgate started, I have read my dad's poem, The Christmas Visitor. And then somehow, somewhere in there, 2002, 2003, it started morphing into Christmas Eve service. When was the first Christmas Eve service? I don't even remember. I don't remember when we started doing that. But as part of that, we just decided, well, let's have the British reading guy read The Christmas Visitor, and then it just became a thing.
How do you even know about this? You've never even met the
I
British
didn't. I've
reading
never
guy.
gotten a chance to meet him. I'm always busy when he shows up, but we've had some nice emails.
Where's he from?
Britain, probably?
England.
He ain't from around here, that's for sure.
What part of England?
Yeah. Okay. So this is funny. So,
Somebody here.
somebody, a grown up,
An adult.
stopped me stopped the British reading guy as he was walking.
Well, hold
through.
on, real quick, just full context. We're referencing a character that Rob plays every year on Christmas Eve, where he comes out. He wears like a funny, not a funny, but like
He
an
looks
old man outfit.
ridiculous.
No. And he comes out and he pretends to be British and he reads a story, and it's pretty clear that it's Rob. Although some of the children sometimes, obviously,
Yes.
are like,
But I did have a grown up.
yeah.
Oh wait, Nate's pointing to himself. What?
I didn't know that it was you for a long time. I thought it was maybe like your brother or something.
Wait a minute. Wait.
Really?
Well, Nate was a kid when he went here, but you were a teenager.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was that period of time.
Yes.
Cool.
That's kind of fun.
So, but you had an adult.
But I had an adult who was from the UK stop me in the outfit I was wearing, saying, "I'm from England too. Where are you from?" And I stood there like a deer in the headlights, and I finally just said the Midlands, because I felt like somewhere in my mind, I think there's a Midlands in England. And the person said, Midlands, okay. And just said, well, it was really nice to meet you, and moved on and stuff. And so I was like, gosh,
So you
I
never
don't
told
know.
them, I'm Rob.
I never did. Why
Couldn't do it.
Why ruin their night?
Yeah.
You can't break character.
Wow.
When you're talking about the corner, I forgot too that this is part of Eastgate's timeline, and it was such a critical thing. Was when we first started on Friday nights, we had Javaluya.
Yeah, it was the 90s, so you have to have mercy on me.
So
But
Javaluya
Javaluya just made sense at
And
that
and
time.
that was
Do we have to have mercy?
that was Friday nights, and as a kid, I loved it because we didn't go, and we would just tear the house apart while you would go.
Yes, that's what I
It was
heard.
really fun. But then as I got older, I went and I would help like make coffee. But we did coffee drinks.
Mm-hmm.
I always want to help with that because there's like whipped cream,
Oh, right.
and so I just went nuts on those cans. But there were bands that would come in and play local
Yeah.
kids, and you have them. I mean, gosh, they're older now.
Cool Hand Luke came and played for us once.
Didn't
Cool Hand
Madison
Luke Forever
Green-
Changed.
Madison Green,
Madison
yeah.
Madison
Green came
Green.
and played?
Madison Green came and played.
Forever Changed. Yeah, they came a lot.
Embraced.
I
was
forgot
Bernard
you knew
came.
them.
Embraced was the main band. They were local guys. They just had a reunion not too long ago over at Moses.
And actually, so I grew up in Jacksonville. I didn't grow up in Panama City, where Eastgate is. I was in a band that played in North Florida and the Southeast region every once in a while. And I reached out to Eastgate before I knew Janelle and I are married. That's something I guess we should clarify. But before I'd even met Janelle, I reached out to Eastgate or the Corner Coffee House, said, hey, I've got a band. We're trying to do a small tour. Do you have time for us? And Jessica, who is Rob's other daughter, Janelle's sister, wrote me back at that time, probably a year or two before I had ever met Janelle or knew about Eastgate.
Wow, I didn't know this.
Oh, you didn't know this?
No.
Yeah, and we got booked for a show. Our band ended up like breaking up for a while, and we didn't come play it.
Yeah.
We did end up playing later after Janelle
Jessica
and I met.
You were
but
booked here for the corner.
Jessica
I was
had
booked
made
for
a
the
flyer
corner, yeah.
for it, and
Come
it said
on.
Eileen, and she was kind of upset.
She was very mad. I wonder if I think she still holds it against me a little
Well, yeah, because she had made the flyer and announced it. My sister Jessica was running the corner for a season, and then y'all canceled last minute, and so she was like, "Oh, this band that was supposed to be here wasn't there." But it was an interesting thing because for 10 years, Eastgate every Friday night was open with local bands playing, and it was just like a place to go hang out.
I saw the first time that you played on stage at
Yeah.
Javalaya. You had
That was with my band.
they got you on keyboard, and I saw Matt before. He was like, "It's just this one
It
note."
was yeah. She had to come up and hit one note, and it makes like this it's a pad, but it was she was very
Yeah, I came up for one song and just hit one note on the keyboard and
I
left.
think you had your head.
I had a
shaved at
shaved
that
head, so I
point.
was not particularly excited to be in front
But
of
that
people.
You
is
did
cool.
great. It was a stellar performance.
It is cool because I do think that was a period of time that brought a lot of people to the church. And when I say the church, I just mean to Jesus, even, that wouldn't have come otherwise. I mean, people have literally said, I was not going to churches, but there was no other place doing like rock shows in Bay County.
Dad, you've had so many people come and talk
Yeah.
to you about what that meant to them to have that space every week that they could come and just.
I think they're
be
being nice,
themselves.
but yeah, that I have had a lot of people mention that just at Pastors United the other day. Got a
Oh,
chance
that
to
guy?
talk to the community outreach person for the sheriff's department. Used to come to Javalaya in the corner. Still is friends with one of the guys that was in the band. Remember, Addison Walk? Remember them?
Yes,
Addison Walk?
I do.
Gosh, I remember them. They came, yeah.
Still plays with them and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it had a good impact on the community. I feel like it was good. I wish we could still do stuff like that.
I'm too tired.
Okay, so now we've talked about the history of Eastgate, and to wrap things up, I wanted to get into what are your hopes for the future of Eastgate?
Yeah, and that's a good question for everybody here.
I have been thinking about that a lot lately. Talked to Janelle about it a few times. But for me, I would really like Eastgate to be a place where nobody can find a home at a church and needs to find a place where they can worship Jesus, learn about Jesus, have a family. I would just like to be a home to people that can't find a home.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that ultimately our goal hasn't changed that much, and I think that that's sort of obviously we have different things where we're like, maybe we want to implement this or try that, but like ultimately the goal is like, yeah, we want to be a place that's welcoming to people, very adamant to stick to the word, and to read it in context, learn about it in context, and to be a place where, yeah, people who maybe, I don't know why I do picture Eastgate sometimes as sort of the last stop for people who are struggling. And it's funny because I think it almost sounds like they're already going to leave the church and they're just stopping by Eastgate to say goodbye. But I do think that there's something to what I would like to see in Eastgate is a place for people who are like, I can't do this anymore. And they come to Eastgate and it's like, well, let's see if this works for you. I don't know if that makes sense. It's not really a goal. Yeah.
I think what you're saying is a space where people can be honest about what their struggles are and like kind of have that space to explore and try to kind of bring it back to the basics of even why this was started, of just, okay, I believe in Jesus, I'm struggling with the rest of it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. I think, yeah. I think because on the surface, Eastgate does have a lot of the sort of basic tenets of a church, of an evangelical church right now. When Eastgate started, sort of the idea of wearing shorts and a t-shirt and, playing guitars like a vineyard or whatever, that was still pretty radical. I mean, that's the kind of church I grew up in as well, but still, like, that was rare. Most churches were still suits and choirs and religion, like deep. And now churches look like this pretty on the surface, rock band on the stage, laid back pastor doing teaching, grace filled, whatever. So I always think like, okay, so what is it that makes us different so that when somebody comes in, they're not like, this is just another church. And the things I think of is authenticity, openness, like you were saying, Janelle, this willingness to be honest about where you're at. And maybe a willingness to admit, because I think this is what people say a lot about what Rob has taught about in you, is a willingness to say, I don't know, I could be wrong. And I think that's a big deal. I think that matters to people. I don't know. My brain's all over the place. It turns out I might have ADHD.
Diagnosed by Janelle or a doctor?
Two different clinicians.
Two different Janelles.
Two different Janelles. No, two different clinicians have said, hey, you might have ADHD. So I think it's turned on right now.
I think that for me, for the goals for Eastgate is really wanting to build a strong community and not of people who care about each other, care about God, care about learning the Bible. That it's not just a few people trying to hold a place together, but that this is a community effort of everybody working together, with similar goals of wanting to love God and love people. And I think too, just continuing that model of grace, offering grace to everybody who walks in the doors. And so I think that those would be my goals. And I think also just continuing the accountability of leadership, making sure leadership continues that servant leadership that we want to model for the community. So that way it's never, because I would say a fear would be that Eastgate would lose that. And so my goal for the future is that we continue to remain committed to that accountability and leadership, that it's not people set above other people, but that we as a community are planting this garden and working on it and tending it together.
Right on. Oh, I like that. That's really good.
Thanks.
Those are good goals.
Do you have any goals, Dad?
No,
I know to
none
retire,
whatsoever.
but
No. My goal has been consistent all the way through to
humble
figure
brag.
out what we're doing. No. No, my goal is, but it has been consistent, and it echoes what you just said and what you said, what everybody has said. The idea here is to be an accepting place. I know that when we came up with the name for Eastgate, came out of Ezekiel 47, the river flowing from the throne of God, under the threshold, through the eastern gate, and out into the desert, to the wilderness places. And there's fishermen beside the river, and there are trees whose leaves are for healing and whose fruit is for food. And that resonated so much with me. I want to be a place where people can be fed, and I mean that on a spiritual level, and not on that selfish, like, I got to be fed or I'm not going to be at this church, but to actually really engage with what the scriptures and the narrative that the scriptures are drawing us into, to get fed spiritually and nourished from that, and then to be a place of healing, to provide, like you were talking about, provide acceptance and healing and all the things that are representative of the gospel and the kingdom of God moving through this world, to be able to embody that as best we can. And I mean, shoot, that's just been the goal all along.
So I'd like to brag on just Eastgate, just the people here. Whenever I talk about, we on Sundays, we don't pass a plate, but we do mention about finances and things like that, and talk about giving. And I always thank everybody for the way that they give. And as a benevolence pastor, there's so much giving that happens amongst everybody here.
Yeah,
in
so
a
cool.
tremendous way. Whenever I call and check on somebody that is going through something, almost every single time I'm hearing, many people have called me about this already. So-and-so is going to be bringing food over to my house.
Just wonderful.
Another person's going to be taking care of my dog, or, checking on the house while I'm gone, or whatever the case may be. It's constant. By the time I hear about something and go and try and do anything to help them, they have already been helped by the people in the community.
Wow.
This already is a family, and the other things that you said that I forgot already. But
she has that effect on people. Were you talking?
But whenever we were just talking about like what was it that you said? Something really good. It was more than family. It was about like people coming together or something.
Building a community and
The
tending
community,
the garden
yeah.
together.
There it is. So there's already a community here of everybody. And then also one of the things that I love doing about whenever I do announcements, I get up there that we have a short break after worship, and then we do announcements. It's about 5 minutes, and whenever I get up on stage, every time, it is a roar in here of everybody communicating with each other, talking with each other, hugging, and just catching up with each other. And it's like that before and after service as well.
It is.
And I've heard that there are places where as soon as the message is over, people are out the door. It's just instant, and people will hang out here for 30, 45 minutes and just hang out and talk with each other.
I don't know if it's true, but I have heard that is a sign of a healthy community when you've got people that just linger and just want to hang out and what?
Janelle's pointing at Blake as the
I've been
lingerer.
lingering around for 8 years.
No, I think that's really good. And maybe, so that makes me think one goal I would have for Eastgate for the future is for that feeling, because I think once you're in Eastgate and you've sort of made your way, you've found your way into the community, whatever that is, you feel that. One goal I would have is that we would find ways as leadership to expand that as much as we can to anybody who shows up in these doors, that they would experience that as well. And I think people do. I'm not like trying to critique us by any means, but I think that's the hardest part probably of any, especially smaller to mid-sized sedan church, is that probably people are going to those churches because they want connection. Like you can go to another church for the production, and if that's what you need, that's great.
Right.
But you're coming here because you're probably looking for community. And so I would say one of my goals is for us as leadership to help encourage
Right on.
that for anybody who walks in these doors.
If you, the listener, have any questions or if there is something you want to learn more about, you can send us an email at egcfpodcast@gmail.com. Join us next episode as we start a discussion on the kings of the Bible. Thank you so much for listening.
And so I was sitting on the dock of the bay.
Wow.
Watching the tide roll away?
Yes.
This was a fun story.
Yeah, just kill it real quick, Blake.